Good evening and welcome to the Livonia Public Schools regular board meeting of March 17th, 2025. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all out there. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Gladly. Mrs. Burton is absent. Mrs. Frank.
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. McFarland.
Here.
Mrs. Acosta is here. President Bradford.
Here. We have a quorum. Mrs. Frank, would you lead us in the pledge this evening, please?
All right. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Good evening. If you'd like to follow along with us at tonight's meeting and you're joining us in person, you can go out the doors to the left and find a copy of tonight's agenda on the table. If you're joining us from home this evening, you can go to our LPS website at www.livoniapublicschools.org, click on the school board tab, go down to board meeting information, find the agenda. You'll be able to click on agendas and then find today's date, and you'll be set to have the agenda for this evening. All right, we are going to go ahead with item 3. We'll continue on communications. Item A is our Read Across America. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolution in recognition of Read Across America during the month of March 2025.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the Read Across America. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Jenkins. Hello, Mrs. Jenkins.
Hello, good evening, President
evening.
Bradford, members of the board, Superintendent Oquist. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And
Thank you.
not only does the month of March signal the coming of spring, finally, it also means that pages are turning and minds are expanding through the power of reading. In Livonia Public Schools, March's Reading Month is a huge celebration and one that includes so many great activities, from guest readers and special book character visits to school-wide read-ins, family activities, author visits, book fairs, and so much more. It's a time when books come to life in our classrooms and in our schools. On March 12th, we had a special visit from Governor Whitmer, who offered, she was actually in the district offering an update on the state's free Pre-K for All initiative. But while she visited our beautiful early childhood center, she took the time to read a book to the little ones in the Owls classroom. And she partnered up with Clifford the Big Red Dog and gave each child a book they could take home. So that was very special. Many of you, including myself, have volunteered to read to students in classrooms across the district. These visits are so much fun, and the kids absolutely love it, as you know. They have more questions than anything else. It's just such a great time. As we do each year here in LPS, we've drafted a special resolution to designate Dr. Seuss's birthday, which is on March the 2nd, 2025, and that marks Read Across America Day, as declared by the National Education Association. At this time, I'd like to invite Trustee Liz Jarvis to join me at the podium to read the resolution into the record. And accepting the resolution, I'm happy to welcome Livonia Education Association President Kelly Eddy, Vice President Megan Brisley, and LEA member and teacher at Johnston Upper Elementary, and my friend, Ann Sherwood. Come on up. You've got a copy?
I do.
Livonia Public Schools Board of Education, March 17th, 2025. Read Across America Resolution. Whereas citizens of the Livonia Public Schools School District stand firmly committed to promoting reading as the catalyst for our students' future academic success, their preparation for America's jobs for the future, and their ability to compete in a global economy. And whereas Read Across America, a national celebration of Dr. Seuss's 121st birthday on March 2nd, 2025, is sponsored by the National Education Association and supported by the Livonia Education Association, and promotes reading and adult involvement in the education of our community students. And whereas motivating children to read is an important factor in student achievement and creating lifelong successful readers. And whereas research has shown that children who are motivated and spend more time reading do better in school. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the trustees of the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District call upon their citizens to assure that every child is reading together with a caring adult throughout the month of March, designated as March is Reading Month, celebrated today, March 17th, 2025, with the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education. And be it further resolved that this body recommits our community to engage in programs and activities to make America's children the best readers in the world.
On behalf of all of the teachers and staff that I represent, thank you for this. As someone who taught high school for a lot of years, we celebrate reading in different ways. We don't get all of the fun stuff that they get in the elementary. So I'm so excited that tomorrow I'm going to be a guest reader for my first time at Webster Elementary. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. Oh, we have a motion? Oh, do we have any comments this evening? Sorry about that.
Mrs. Bradford, thank you.
Mrs. Oakwist.
Thank you so much, ladies, for being here and joining us tonight. We love having members of our LEA team here each year, and how exciting that you're going to be a guest reader. It's one of our favorite things to do, and you'll see some highlights in the update tonight, but thank you for taking the time. We appreciate Mrs. Jenkins putting this together for us on behalf of the NEA, and we agree. This is foundational to the learning for our students, and it's something that we are all committed to in the district. So we are grateful for our teachers who work so hard on this each and every day, and we are so proud of our kiddos who choose to pick up books and immerse themselves in what I think is one of the greatest pastimes. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Mrs. Jenkins.
Yes, thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for Read Across America. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. McFarland,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes, President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion is carried. All right, we're going to move on to item 3B, one of our favorite things at our meetings, our district update from our superintendent. Mrs. Oakwist, are you ready to share with all the great things happening?
I am. Thank you so much, President Bradford, for this opportunity each month. So we're going to go ahead and put it up there on the screen. And we have a lot to share, so I will move quickly through these items and share just some of the great things happening in our schools and on behalf of and with our students. So we're going to hop right in and start with some pictures of our students learning and growing. So we'll start here. We had both Franklin and Stevenson held what they called a night at the museum at the Oakmont Senior Living Center. Both the students and the seniors enjoyed socializing with one another, and our students had an opportunity to display their art. And I know on a few different updates this year, we've shared our students going out to our senior centers, of which there are many in Livonia. And I just love that connection. So we thank them for that. Okay, we don't want to go backwards. We want to go forward. Do you want to just go ahead and manually go through? Thank you. All right. And does anyone know what March 14th was?
Pi Day.
Pi Day, Pi without the E. And so it was Pi Day, and Hayes Elementary students had fun learning about what that meant. They also got a chance to try some tasty pies, but I am sure that there were many math teachers across this district talking about 3.14 and beyond. So always great to see that happening, and nothing wrong with adding a little treat in there. Riley Upper Elementary held their annual pizza, popcorn, and paperbacks event. A great turnout from families. We had a number of staff there as well. It's a great opportunity to pick up some great books, have a treat, and share that time together as a community. March definitely is reading month. We have such creative things going on out in the schools. I know that all of you have reading dates on your calendars. You'll see some photos that have been shared with us from your visits out there, but we'll start off with Hoover that had a Candyland theme this year, so pretty cool. I have no doubt that our kiddos there have loved it. I'm going to have a chance to see that tomorrow when I read at Hoover. And we also are moving on to Cleveland Elementary. So a number of schools have done this. I think it's such a cool idea. So it kind of is a takeoff on the March Madness, the basketball brackets, but they are reading books and taking the brackets down to the final choice of the favorite book in the school. So each grade level starts with 2 books in their bracket. They narrow it down, and then finally we get down to a champion. So it's all about their featuring their favorite books. They also created, Coolidge created a rainforest reading lounge for their kiddos with their amazing art teacher. Of course, our elementary teacher of the year, Mrs. Stark. And of course, many volunteers. And then Rosedale set up some great circus decorations across the school. So you can just see the creativity of those themes from Candyland to March Madness to the circus. We also have some rock and rollers over at Roosevelt. Gotta love that. Sharing why reading rocks over at Roosevelt to get the kids inspired to read. And we have a few more from Roosevelt. Of course, we had our chief academic officer, Mrs. O'Brien, has been out on the reading circuit. Here are a couple of pictures with her doing some classroom reading. I had a chance to read at the Livonia Early Childhood Center to a couple of 3-year-old preschool classes, and they were absolutely adorable and very sweet. We read a book called If I Built a School, which I thought was perfect for them because they are the first ones in a new school that was built for them. So we had a good time reading together. We have Board Trustee Mark Johnson, who has also been on the reading circuit. This was one of his stops at Kennedy Elementary, and you have been at a number of schools throughout our district, and we appreciate that.
10.
Yes. And we have Trustee Colleen Burton, who was a special guest reader at Niji last week, or I think the week prior. And we also had meteorologist Paul Gross read one of his favorites, no surprise, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It's a great book and perfect for a meteorologist to read. He was over at Kennedy, and he shared on his social media that he thought our kiddos had some really outstanding questions for him. We were thrilled to have Coach Acosta bring a number of football players from Stevenson High School over to Randolph to read. You know, we think they may enjoy seeing us come out there. I will tell you, there is nothing like them having high schoolers come out. They get a chance to see their future selves. They get a chance to see these big kids come out and read to them. They absolutely love it, and I love that our high schoolers take time to do that. So thank you to them. We had a chance to hold a parent night. It was really to be focused on school safety and mental health supports. So we want to thank our student assistance providers, especially at the high school, who partnered with Mr. Etu in helping to coordinate this special fair. We also had a retired Michigan State trooper, Walt Kreider, who was there on behalf of OK to Say. I know that's certainly something you're familiar with. It's a hotline that runs 24/7 where students, parents, staff, anyone can report concerning behavior, and then that is investigated by school staff and or police. So we had that, but there were also about 20 to 25 community resource providers who were there to help families and to give them the resources that they may need for social emotional support, mental health support, school safety questions. I want to thank Mike Riley, our supervisor our administrator of public safety, and our school resource officers who were all there as well, to be able to help answer questions and give parents some really important information. Spring sports are underway. That's hard to believe since we're also going to share with you some great wrap-ups from winter season. But we are getting ready and we are just beginning to practice. We've had some nice weather to get started, so you'll see them getting warmed up out there. A lot has been going on with our unified sports. Frost Unified Basketball has had a few really great games. They were thrown off a bit by their start because of some of our cold and snow days, which both happened to fall on Thursdays. But they have since been joined by a pep band, lots of cheering crowds, and Frankie, I think we shared with you a couple months ago, the new Frost mascot. And I also want to share that last week, a number of us were able to head out to Hillside School in Northville, and Northville and Frost basketball played an amazing game. Mr. Abate and Mrs. Keats brought our aspiring administrators group out there because Mrs. Sproul was going to be presenting along with her coordinators. And it was a wonderful game. It was a great opportunity to show the very best of what's happening in Unified Athletics. And we're very proud that members of our team and members of the Northville administrative team have been invited out to RISA in April to their board meeting to present on the efforts for Unified Athletics in Livonia Public Schools and in Northville. So we're really, really thrilled to be asked to do that. Churchill got to go on the big court. I mean, we think our courts are pretty cool, but there is nothing quite like being out at LCA. So they were able to go downtown and get into the same spot that the Pistons play. How cool is that? So Churchill was out there for their unified game. And we have Grant and Garfield teaming up. Some great inclusion work from both of those schools and both of those staffs and administration. So Grant's Inclusion Committee was able to partner with Garfield Skill Center, and they created some new inclusion swag for students and staff, really focusing on inclusion is cool and having those buttons for folks to wear. So thanks for that collaborative effort, and it sure is cool to include others. The Day of Music, as you know, was last week. The Day of Music is year 2. What a great opportunity for our high school orchestra students, choir students, and band students come to each of our upper elementaries. And they were able to put on a performance, and it happens just before the 7th grade preview night. So before the kiddos are making their choices for their schedules and classes, they get a chance to try on instruments, have a chance to sing in a high school choir. They have a chance to see what all the instruments are in the orchestra and the band. It's a great opportunity. It happened at Johnson and Riley and Cooper. So I want to thank our music teachers for putting that together, for our upper elementaries for hosting. A number of us were able to attend the Day of Music, and we were absolutely wowed by the rapt attention our 6th graders gave to the high schoolers who were performing. And then in the afternoon, their class got a chance to go down and literally try on instruments and play them and get fitted, be part of the choir, and be able to make that decision as an informed decision. So some of the changes we've made at the upper elementary level to music have really paid off. And it's been a great opportunity to make sure kids are really in the right place as they head on to middle school. We're so proud of the music efforts in the district. As you know, and as Mrs. Jenkins mentioned, the Livonia Early Childhood Center has been in the spotlight. Not only did the Chamber award it the Community Enhancement Award for this year, we were proud to host Governor Whitmer and her MyLeap team at the ECC. So she was talking about the state's offerings for free preschool via GSRP. As you know, we have 5 wonderful GSRP classrooms at our new Early Childhood Center. So the governor was able to share some of that information, and Dr. Dodge did a phenomenal job along with her team of preparing to host on relatively short notice, but we're always happy to have our special guests there. Another special guest was Clifford. I'm going to tell you there was a little bit of a rival with who was the most popular. Kids were pretty excited to see the governor. They were really excited to see Clifford too. Really, really proud to host that visit and to really focus on the importance of early childhood education. Lots of kudos going on. Here we go, let's go. Stevenson's mock trial teams competed in the Oakland Regional Competition. They finished in the top 3, and they are now qualifiers for states. Way to go, awesome job. Our bowlers continue to just rock it out. What a great addition that has been to the offerings for our high schoolers. So we want to congratulate all of our bowlers who qualified for states. We have Owen and Brooklyn, and I thought we had one more in there. I know we have Owen and Brooklyn, who both qualified and finished with the title of regional champion. So proud of them. At Stevenson, we also had Ava Young qualifying for states, and she placed 6th in Division I to earn her spot. And certainly Churchill is not to be left out. We have our bowlers Joey, Isabel, Carissa, and Sophia, who all qualified for states. So we had a great showing coming out of LPS. Thank you to our coaches, and thank you to our hardworking student athletes. We're happy to see how those programs have taken off. Lots of gymnasts qualified as well. So we have our Churchill from our red team here. We have Nevaeh and Sadie, and then Franklin gymnast Casey, all qualified for states. You know, we've had some great state champions here over the past few years. We also had our Stevenson gymnastics team qualify for team state. So you can qualify as individuals or for a team. So we see here Maya Chamberlain and Alvia Olson and Leah, Janet, and Chloe all qualified for individual. And Coach Aaron Polk also finished the season with an award for Gymnastics Coach of the Year. So congratulations to Coach Polk for that. What a great honor. And here are some swim champs. You know, what a hardworking group, right? They're up early, they're in the water, they're giving it their all. So we want to congratulate Churchill's boys swim. They were KLAA East Division champs. We had Austin, who won the conference and set both a school and a KLAA record. So way to go. We had Josh placed as a KLAA champion, and Matthew, Aiden, and Alex all were state qualifiers. We had a couple from Stevenson as well, both 2 Lukes. Luke Cuffatelli and Luke Sosnowski were awarded all conference honors. You may recognize those last names. Their parents are employees of and part of our staff in LPS, so congratulations to them. And I know many of us were there. Boy, oh boy, were those some exciting games. Wow. Stevenson hockey won the quarterfinals. They won the semis. They made it to the state championship game, and they came out as the state runner-up for this year in Division II. What a tremendous season for them. So much excitement, and congratulations to Coach Mitchell and Team 48 for all that you did this year. So proud of all of you. That was a heartbreaking loss in overtime, but to get to states is no easy feat, especially in such a tough division. So congratulations to them. What about Phantom of the Opera? Phantom of the Opera was 2 weekends ago. Huge congratulations to them. The set was marvelous. A ton of talent. Congratulations to everyone involved in that production. And when I say there are as many people behind the scenes as there are on the stage, We want to give credit to the crew, to everyone who was part of the costuming, the makeup, designing it, and of course, performing it. And then this past weekend had the Addams family on the next slide at Franklin High School. Another tremendous performance, a ton of work put in, not only by the staff and students, but by a ton of volunteers. And I'd like to extend a thank you to Franklin, who offered an invitation for any staff member in Livonia Public Schools to attend complimentary, to attend this wonderful performance. So thank you to them, and congratulations to our kiddos who probably had a good night's sleep on Sunday night. Excuse me, just a second. We want to share the Stevenson Student Senate brought home the Award of Excellence. We shared with you, I think, last month that they had gone off to the MASC, their state conference. We want to give a special shout out to the seniors, Sophia, Lily, and Tucker. They were chosen to present at the conference after scoring in the top 3 at regionals. We had for the Chamber Awards, the Chamber Leadership Dinner, which took place just a few weeks ago. I want to first point out our Churchill student, Hayden Hahn. He was named Livonia's Outstanding Youth. He does some wonderful work, and we've been able to highlight his efforts if you'd like to read a little bit more about those. But we are so proud of Hayden as being named Livonia's Outstanding Youth. And then we want to thank the Chamber for highlighting our educators and support staff of the year. And then finally, of course, for the Community Enhancement Award that Livonia Public Schools was given as a whole for building and opening the new Livonia Early Childhood Center. It was an honor to be part of that evening, and we thank the Chamber for all of the recognition that they shared that evening. How cool is this? So many of you know Jenna Sparza, longtime student activities director, student activities advisor over at Franklin High School. She was awarded the Michigan Student Activities Advisor of the Year for the entire state of Michigan. And so what a great and well-deserved honor for her. Her students were so thrilled about that, and Mr. Pacey drove up to be there for the surprise honor as well. So congratulations, Jen. You do such terrific work, as do all of our student activities advisors. The Livonia Human Relations Commission does such tremendous work in our city. They recently had a writing contest, an essay contest in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and they named 3 of our students award winners. They were able to be honored by the Livonia Human Relations Commission at a recent city council meeting, which unfortunately coincided the same night as one of our board meetings. But they honored 3 of our students for their work in the essay contest, and each student received a $200 gift card. So we want to congratulate them, and we want to thank the Human Relations Commission for being such important partners with Livonia Public Schools. PTSA Founders Day, what a great event. We had the state PTA president there, lots of past LPTSA presidents, and we want to congratulate each of the staff members, the student members of the PTSA, and the parent volunteers who were honored, one of each from each school. And congratulations to Mandy, our LPTSA president, and the whole crew for putting on this great evening. A number of us were also able to attend the MSBOA festival. So this is a big deal, and this is the end of season competition, shall we say, for our band, orchestra, and wind ensembles. Here's a picture of Stevenson, but Churchill recently did the same, as did Frost and Holmes. They received straight 1s in not only performance, but sight reading and their overall scores. Holmes Symphony Band and Chamber Orchestra also received straight 1s. If you've not seen that before, I would encourage you to visit. It's so impressive. In the sight reading, the students get 5 minutes to review the piece and to understand it and to take that in. Their teacher is able to walk them through that a bit, and then they are asked to play that in front of the judges. 5 minutes on a new piece. They are so impressive. Our musicians are unbelievable. Here we have Churchill's Chamber Orchestra and Wind Ensemble. They earned straight ones on their ratings, and the Symphony Band earned a 1, 2, 2, and 1 rating, placing them just shy of a superior rating. And Frost Symphonic Band and Chamber Orchestra both received straight ones on their ratings. So they were a week later. And our Warriors had a big, big weekend. They took it all at Kettering University. They joined the #1 alliance, and they ended up in first place. So congratulations to our Warriors. Both the Warriors team and the Tyros team were great competitors and did a wonderful job. We are so proud of what they did. The team also won the Autonomous Award for consistent scoring. And they did so in the autonomous mode. We want to recognize junior student captain Reagan was selected as a Dean's List finalist, and where she will also compete at states. So a tremendous showing for our Warriors and for our Tyros. And to bring home a win like this really sets them up for a big competition we have, and I'll note it at the end of our, at my update that we have coming up at Churchill that we hope you'll attend. Global Ed also champions. So Global Ed, has their Mayman competition, so it's the Model UN. It's essentially their states. It's that time of year, can you tell? So they took highest honor and best prepared school at Mayman this year. They have come close many, many years. They've been second place a number of years. So to take the highest honor and best prepared school speaks volumes. We also had individual student delegates who won awards at the conference. So just an absolutely huge congratulations. Having had a daughter participate in Mayman for 4 years, I know how much work goes into preparation for this. It is not for the lighthearted, and the work that they do is so impressive. You would not believe they are high schoolers if you went out there and saw them at the Model UN. So great, great work, and a big congratulations to our Global Ed team at Stevenson. DECA competition. DECA has, as you know, they were in their state DECA competition, and we have many students who will be advancing to the International Career Development Conference, and we wish them luck. So we, as you might recall, we had great success at regionals, and now at states, and we have some who will be moving on to the international sector. And Mr. Etu, do we know where that's taking place? Orlando. Aw, they've got to head to Florida for that. I don't know. Just a few more mark your calendar notes. Thank you, President Bradford. This was a long one. As I mentioned, the robotics competition is coming to Churchill. So please mark your calendar, March 28th and 29th. Both admission and parking are free. But if you'd like a little something from the bake sale, bring a few dollars. But we would love for you to be there to cheer on our Warriors and our Tyros teams. So again, at Churchill High School, it will be in the gymnasium, and the kickoff is normally somewhere around 10 o'clock on the first day of competition. So we hope you will be there and that you will join us. In the Fine Arts Festival, the work of our talented students, thanks to the guidance of our art teachers across the district, will kick off on April 4th, but the projects will be there all month. We love partnering with the library at the Civic Center. They are able to display our students' work for the month of April, but if you'd like to join us between 5:30 and 7, that will be the opening of the Fine Arts Festival and on the 4th. The Spring Fashion Show, this is always a not-to-be-missed event. I know a number of us were there last year as well. The LCTC Fashion Merchandising class puts on its annual fashion show on April 22nd. So it is a charity event. To be honest, I am not certain who the recipient of their charity will be this year, but they'll certainly share that with us. The students help design all of the outfits and put on the show. It's an entirely student-led affair, and that will be at St. Mary's Cultural Center. I think we've come to the conclusion. Thank you, President Bradford.
Wow.
I know.
Wow,
There's
I-
a lot to be proud of. Our students are remarkable, and we're so grateful for all the things that our staff help them to learn about and participate in.
Truly, it is so amazing. I mean, to see all the accolades and all the hard work our students are doing every day is just amazing to me. So we appreciate our staff, our students, our families. Keep up the good work, that's for sure. A lot to be proud of. We're going to move on to item 3C, written communications. I do not have any written communications this evening. So we will move on to item 3D, response to prior audience communications. We do not have any of that this evening either. So we will move on to item 3E, our audience communications. Audience communications is a time set aside for the board to listen to the concerns of our community. It is not a question and answer period, but rather a time set aside for us to listen thoughtfully to your concerns. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. Our Vice President, Mrs. Frank, will be our timekeeper tonight. When you hear the tone go off, we ask that you politely finish and wrap up your comments. The board, a couple things, is responsible for 3 main roles: hiring and evaluating our superintendent, adopting policies that give the district direction to set the priorities and achieve its goals, and also adopting and overseeing our budget. So if your comments pertain to those 3 roles and you would like a response to your question, you will expect to hear a response from the members of our board. If your comments pertain to anything else and you would like a response and you indicated on your blue slip, or something, or what we call the day-to-day operations of the school district, you should expect to hear from our superintendent or a member of her cabinet team. So with that, I do have a blue slip, a guest speaker this evening, and I would like to call up Steve King. And former school board member, so welcome this evening. You're going to tap the microphone there?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. All right, thank
I
you.
like what you've done to the place. Love to see all the LED lighting. In line with March Reading Month, I wanted to donate these books to the district, and I wanted to do it publicly because I wanted to publicly give a shout out to the people involved. These are award-winning books, and the author, Linda Six, is a Livonia resident. And the illustrator is probably the greatest artist who's ever lived in Livonia, Dave Messing. He is a sculptor, painter, model builder. He's just unbelievable. And you might know him from Art Store and more, so he's also a local business owner. Nice. So I wanted to donate these and let you know I did read in the classroom, and I just wanted to speak a little bit to that program as a administrator, teacher, and someone who's been in the classroom over the years. A lot of dignitaries, celebrities, they come in and read. And we have a real problem with our reading scores in the state. Only 24% of 4th graders are reading proficiently. So I don't think Lansing's going to solve this problem. I think it's up to us individually. And I mean brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandma, grandpas. So I would like to see just everyday run-of-the-mill folks like myself, an average Joe, in those classrooms. And I would like to see you reach out to those people, bring those people in, not the people that Channel 4 is going to cover. Because we know kids learn to read by the 3rd grade, and then they read to learn going on. We know how important that is. And just one last thing, I went to the open house at the Career Technical Center. And yeah, I put a lot of money into that, but I was just a little bit disappointed with the lack of focus on skilled trade. Anybody who's in position of decision-making has to recognize the trends that are coming. And AI, quantum computing, all of this stuff is going to be taking all these jobs we're now training these kids to do. So we need plumbers, not programmers, carpenters, not coders. So we have to really focus on these jobs. I pushed for years to get welding there. We don't have welding. I pushed for years to get masonry. We don't have masonry. Try to get anything done around your house. Talk to any builder. They can't find people to do these. So I think we have to really, really, really focus on that. And one last thing, great to see bowling. When I was on the board for years, I tried to get bowling in this district, and I was told, can't do it, no possible way. And even though Clarenceville had done it the whole time, but that's great to see. So thank you for your time. I'll leave these outside.
Yes, thank you so much for the books. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 4, our consent agenda. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. Item 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of February 18th, 2025.
Support. We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis for our consent agenda. Is there any member of the board who wishes to remove this item off of the consent agenda? Okay. Seeing none, we have the motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis for the consent agenda. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. McFarland,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. We are going to head and move down to item 6, our business matters. And 6A is the approval of LPS merchandise purchase. May I have a motion, please?
Hang on one moment, I'm sorry. Yep, excellent, there we go.
Yeah.
Move that the Board of Education of Livonia Public Schools approve the purchase of Livonia Public Schools merchandise from MSB Incorporated, South Lyon, Michigan, for an amount not to exceed $120,000.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of LPS merchandise purchase. And tonight we were going to hear from Mrs. Smith. Good evening,
President
Mrs. Smith.
Bradford. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this with you at both our study session and the Committee of the Whole meeting. I know as the board is aware, this has become a little tradition for us over the last number of years. In May, we try to recognize our wonderful staff and show some appreciation for all the hard work that they do every day. And we have now, for the last couple of years, done an online store where staff can go online and pick out a piece of apparel that is embroidered with the LPS logo, and then the staff can pick whatever they'd like, and then this company, MBS, will create it for us. They individually bag it and deliver it to each one of our schools. They've done a wonderful job for us. They've created a website where the staff can go online and pick the items. And it is my recommendation, as shared, that we continue to work with MBS. That $120,000 amount came by way of allocating about $60 per staff member, and we have about 2,000 staff members. In the event that not all 2,000 were to pick an item, that remaining budget would go back to our general fund, but we're hoping to come to you once for this purchase, and we want to make sure that we request enough funds to cover in the event that every staff member participates in our merchandise store.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, President Bradford. Having been in the schools reading at a number of schools, it's amazing how many of our staff wear the Spirit wear.
Yeah.
They're always wearing something with the LPS logo on it, and I think this is just a great program, and I think they really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I agree. It's great to have the merchandise on our staff, in our buildings, and out in our community. So when they're out and about and wearing our logos, people see it and they recognize it. And this has been a great program and a way to just give some kudos to our teachers and say thank you for everything that they do every day. So it's a wonderful, wonderful purchase. Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of LPS merchandise purchase. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 6B, the approval of media center technology purchase. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Frank?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation from its technology consultant, Integrated Design Solutions, and approve Moss Telecommunication, Grand Rapids, Michigan, for the Media Center Technology Project for a total amount of $183,406, which includes contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mr. McFarland, for the approval of Media Center technology purchase. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank
Good
you very
evening.
much. Good evening, everybody. This is approval that we're recommending for the 2025 summer bond work. As we discussed at last week's Committee of the Whole, there's always going to be some technology that has to go in, especially in the LMCs when we go in and renovate those spaces. So really what we're covering here is the work that Moss Telecommunications will be doing, things such as installing short throws, speakers, sound system, doing the cabling, and which would be like the Ethernets, et cetera. So this is an important piece of the overall project for our summer 2025 bond work at the four buildings, Churchill, Johnson, Grant, and Buchanan.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we do have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mr. McFarland, for the approval of Media Center technology purchase. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6C, the approval of Stevenson Tennis Court resurface project. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mr. Johnson?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation from its owner's representative, Plant Moran Real Point, and its designer, Foresight Design, Inc., and approve Laser Sport Resurfacing, Plymouth, Michigan, for the Stevenson High School tennis court resurface project for a total amount of $96,690, which includes contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of Stevenson Tennis Court resurface project, and we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you again. We had quite a bit of discussion about this last week at the Committee of the Whole, so I don't want to go through all of the details of the why and how and all of that. So I will just start off by saying if anybody wants a lot more information, I should say, please go back and watch last week's Committee of the Whole. There's quite a bit of information about what occurred, the anticipation that we had of it potentially happening, et cetera, at the Stevenson tennis courts. So I will then just jump in now and say that we do support and ask the board to approve these funds for laser sport resurfacing to come in and do the work this summer at the Stevenson courts. Again, it's an aesthetic item, but after this work in the summer, we'll be having that fixed and completed, and it'll look very good again. Really, it is something that, like we had mentioned before, it was anticipated. It's always a possibility, and again, I won't go down that too much because we had plenty of that conversation last week, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have about it again today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have any additional questions or any comments about that project? Okay. All right, seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of Stevenson Tennis Court resurface project. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6D, the approval of paving project. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation from the owner's representative, Plant Moran Real Point, and approve for the paving project Best Asphalt Inc., Romulus, Michigan. This project consists of paving projects at Central Office, Franklin High School, and the Bentley track with a total cost not to exceed $1,450,759.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of paving project. And once again, Mr. Francis.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Best Asphalt was the low responsible bidder for this planned sinking fund project that's going to be taking place this summer of 2025. As mentioned and as read in the board resolution, it's a portion of the central office complex here where we're at. We'll be taking the paving done this summer. We're trying to get the most out of it with regard to the paths that the buses travel. We also have a section of Franklin's student parking lot, and we then also have the Bentley track over at the Bentley field that we're going to be doing a simple mill and cap and cleaning that track up. So we, again, do recommend this Best Asphalt for this project this summer.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions or comments? All right, I just want to say I'm happy to see we're doing the Bentley track. I think that's going to be great for our community to utilize, and since we do own that, it's good for us to keep that up as best we can.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a nice project for,
Yes, and I
for
very
our
much
families.
look forward to seeing Mr. Johnson in his track shoes on the Bentley track once again.
Yes, alumni, Mr. Johnson. All right. All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of paving project. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 7, instruction matters. Item 7A, the approval of expulsion of a secondary student. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District expel one secondary student for violations of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education policies.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the approval of expulsion of secondary student. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 8, personnel matters. Item 8A, sympathy resolution. May I have a motion, please?
Yes, President Bradford.
Mr. McFarland.
Move that the Board of Education of Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached sympathy resolution for the family of Maureen Mahoney.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mrs. Jarvis for the sympathy resolution. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, hello, everyone. Whereas the Board of Education was truly saddened to hear of the untimely death of a wonderful individual, Maureen Mahoney, and whereas she was a highly valued member of our staff in the Livonia Public Schools School District, as a bookkeeper at the Livonia Career Technical Center, a clerk and cashier in the Food Services Department, and secretary at Stevenson High School, Dickinson Center, and Holmes Middle School. Whereas she consistently demonstrated her outstanding dedication to students, parents, and staff through her care, commitment, and kindness, and whereas Maureen Mahoney will be remembered with great fondness and with a profound sense of gratitude for the immeasurable contributions she made to our school district. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District offers its deepest and most sincere sympathy to the family and friends of Maureen Mahoney.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mrs. O'Quist.
Thank you, President Bradford. I just wanted to extend on behalf of the Board of Education and our cabinet team in the district our sympathies to Mrs. Mahoney's daughters, her beautiful grandchildren and her entire family. She had lots of cousins, close friends, and is remembered by her colleagues at homes where she had spent, gosh, I think at least 18 years most recently. Just remembered so warmly for the person she was, the huge heart that she had. Her family celebrated her life today with her service purposefully on St. Patrick's Day. And she was remembered with great fondness and many tears. Someone lost far too soon at 62 years old. So we extend our really sincere sympathy and sadness for her family and want to send our love to them along with this resolution.
Thank you so much. All right. We have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mrs. Jarvis for our sympathy resolution. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 8B, teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Frank?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2024-25 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for teachers for approval. This evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you. The prospective new staff members we are presenting to the board this evening have been selected to fill needs in special education and elementary art instruction. They're very well qualified to fill these positions and have been vetted through our extensive interview process. We are confident they will perform at a high level and represent Livonia Public Schools in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in the 24-25 budget. We're pleased to be recommending these talented professionals to join our LPS family, and with your approval, we're excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from any board members?
Welcome.
Welcome to LPS. Yep. All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for teachers for approval. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on, item 8C, retirements. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. Johnson?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for services rendered by Dawn Guthard, Cindy Letka, Stephen Mack, Jacqueline McMillan, Daniel McMurtry, and Kevin Rucat.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for retirements. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Tonight, we honor and congratulate 6 members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools. As these staff members leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 157 years of experience and service. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank these staff members for their dedicated years of service they've provided the students of Livonia Public Schools, and we ask the board to please adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for our retirees.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from people? From our board members? Congratulations. These are always hard, the retirements, because we just love our staff so much. We do know that they have to, at some point, head into retirement. So we wish you all the best. Absolutely. All the best. Congratulations. We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for retirements. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 9A, second reading of Board Policy IDAA, Career Technical Education. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Jarvis?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IDAA, Career Technical Education.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the second reading of Board Policy IDAA, Career Technical Education. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
This policy we updated and discussed at our study session, our committee of the whole, and we had our first reading last month. No changes have been made since it was read into the record last month.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the second reading of Board Policy IDAA, Career Technical Education. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 9B, the second reading of Board Policy DG, Deposit of Funds. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy DG, Deposit of Funds.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. McFarland, for the second reading of Board Policy DG, Deposit of Funds. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, President Bradford.
Yes.
Just as with our last policy, this was something we covered at both the study session and committee meeting. At our committee meeting, we did make a few changes, but no changes have been made since the first reading. It is rather short, so I could read it for us tonight. It reads, "The treasurer of the Board of Education shall deposit district funds in a financial institution approved by the board." So just as it was at our last meeting.
Great, thank you so much. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Frank.
Just as we are going through all of these, just as Mrs. Smith said, these all have been at 2 study sessions, 2 committee of the wholes, and 1 board meeting, and so this is the second board meeting that they've been at. So these are really important district policies, but there's not a lot of discussion because they've been discussed many, many times. But I just wanted to state that as we're changing policy, and it doesn't sound like we're having any discussion. We've discussed a lot.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. I think we do remind everybody for second reading especially. Those are usually final policy changes. All right, thank you for that. We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. McFarland, for the second reading of Board Policy DG, Deposit of Funds. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. McFarland.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on, item 9C, the second reading of Board Policy DH, Bonded Employees. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. McFarland.
Move that the Board of Education of Livonia Public Schools School District accepts the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy DH, Bonded Employees.
Support.
Sorry about that. We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. McFarland.
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Sorry, my computer went out here. For the second reading of Board Policy DH, Bonded Employees. This evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Smith.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, President
I'll get
Bradford.
this
Just like our last policy, this is one that we've discussed at length, and no changes since the first reading at our last regular board meeting. It's another short one that I'm happy to read. The district shall purchase an individual bond or blanket bond that covers district employees involved in managing district funds.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from our board members? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. McFarland, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the second reading of Board Policy DH, Bonded Employees. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 9D, the second reading of Board Policy DL, Safeguarding District Assets. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Frank?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy DL, Safeguarding District Assets.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the second reading of Board Policy DL, Safeguarding District Assets. And again, we'll hear from Mrs. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bradford. Again, a nice and short one that we've had lots of discussion about. This board policy will now read, the superintendent or designee shall ensure the implementation and enforcement of administrative procedures to safeguard all funds, equipment, and property throughout the district.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the second reading of Board Policy DL, Safeguarding District Assets. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. McFarland?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 9E. This is a first reading of bylaw of the board BHA Code of Ethics. So since it's a first reading, we will not be doing a motion. We're just going to go ahead and discuss this evening. Annually, our board revisits this policy, our Code of Ethics, and as board members, we read through those statements that we want people to know, that we try to abide by. We abide by every meeting. And we've made several changes, just a few in here. And I'll read the ones that we changed. Moving on down to item bullet point, I think it's 7. It says, I will come to board meetings prepared to discuss and take action on all agenda items. I will read and study the board meeting information, seeking clarification if needed prior to each board meeting. And is there any changes that we would like to make on that? Okay. All right, the next one that we were looking at is on the next page, the very first bullet point. It says, I will work with my fellow board members toward consensus when making decisions. Once a decision is made, I will support the decision and its implementation. Does that sound all right?
Sounds good.
Okay, and bullet point number 2 there, we made a few changes. I recognize that while I am free to express my personal views, the board president is the spokesperson for the board and the superintendent is the spokesperson for the district. This includes all written and spoken communications, including social media. All right. So there are a series, I think at the very end bullet point, we made a small change and took out the word will, I will. We took I, along with my fellow board members, will review, revise, and sign this code of ethics annually at the beginning of each calendar year. I believe those are the only changes that we have made. And does anybody have any questions? This will be brought before our next regular board meeting. We will adopt this code of ethics, and we will also be signing them. I realize it'll be at our April meeting. We were just a tad bit behind this year with that, but we do this every year. We do go through our bylaws and usually with a fine-tooth comb and make some changes if we need to. Any other questions or comments regarding the Board of Ethics policy? Mrs. Frank.
Thank you. I think we say it every year, but I'm just proud to be on a board that has a code of ethics that follows a standard policy for how we act and how we interact with each other. And I just think it's so important that we set aside time to do this every year and to all agree on how we're going to act and conduct our business as a board.
Yes, I agree with that. We are very fortunate to have a board that lives and breathes this code of ethics and understands how to operate at every time, how to be respectful and listen to everybody's concerns in a respectful manner. So thank you to everybody. That, again, that will be on for the second reading at our next regular board meeting. All right, and the next item we'll move on to, we're going to page 2 tonight. Not too bad, though. Item 9F, the first reading bylaw of the board, BCB, general order of business at regular meetings. And let me get to that policy. All right, so this is a policy. I'm going to get to the policy in a minute here. Okay. So this change in policy happens to be our order, how we order our business at a regular meeting. We felt that usually under communications, we have recognitions and other communication items, district update from the superintendent, and then you'll see an item every week that, or every regular meeting that is on our agenda about written communications and then response to prior audience communications. I think we've had this policy for a long time. Written communications was usually, because now that we have technology in place, we used to get a packet of information, or we might get some written communications given to us, but we just don't see a whole lot of that anymore. So we were hoping that we could just eliminate that item off of our agenda. Is everybody okay with doing that? It doesn't mean that we won't have any or talk about it, correct? Mrs. O'Quist.
I would just say that it was intended and it was used probably 15 or 20 years ago when someone would drop something off to our office, and we would make copies of that and distribute it to every board member at the board meeting. Now, with email, people literally never do that. I can't remember the last time we just had simply a written communication that either individual copies weren't provided for everyone, or it wasn't sent via email, or we didn't just simply scan and email it to you. So that was really when I believe the district used to receive those written communications, copy them for the board, and leave them for the board to review at the board meeting. That I don't believe has been in use for the past 15 years or so.
Okay, yeah, I think we were all in agreement that that would be okay to do. Mrs. Acosta?
And I'll just, because you mentioned both of those items, I just wanted to reiterate what I stated during our Committee of the Whole meeting, that this does not change our common practice. So if someone comes, for instance, the blue slip, and indicates on the bottom that they would like a response to their question or comment, that continues to be the practice. So this doesn't change the way that we operate. Yes.
Correct, thank you. Okay, and the other one was response to prior audience communications. Typically, that is done, again, with a blue slip. If somebody wants, on our blue slip, if you want a response written, there's a spot on that blue slip that says, please indicate if you'd like a response. And so we have found in the past that we have not had very many response to prior audience communications. However, we realize if we did have something that the board wanted to say or at our meeting, we could offer a point of privilege and also address some type of a response if we needed to at any point in time. So we felt that we could also pull that response to prior audience communications off of our agenda at our regulars. Mrs. O'Quist.
Thank you, President Bradford. And again, just for our viewing audience, that really isn't that there won't be response to audience communication. It's just it would not be publicly by the board president at a board meeting. So that response would come either via phone or written communication that would come from either the board president, myself, or a member of our administrative team, and that would go in short order back to that person after they've spoken to the board. So it would not wait until the following month for a board meeting to be addressed publicly. That really was in place again for maybe something that had widespread interest. So the board president may have responded to something that had come up in a prior meeting and spoken to that broadly, but certainly individuals will always receive that response.
Yes. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that one also? All right, seeing none, that will also come for a second reading at our April regular meeting, so we'll see that for our second reading. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to item 9G, a first reading of board policy JBF, release time, and this evening Mr. Green's going to talk about that. Good evening, Mr. Green.
Good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. Yes, as we discussed at our previous study session at Roosevelt Elementary in our committee of the whole meeting previously on board policy JBF for a first reading, this will be called students release time, so that will be fixed for the second reading. And I'm going to read it for you tonight because it's quite short. The Board of Education grants to the administration the right to release students from school for religious instruction up to 2 hours per week when written notice is provided to the school. And we'll have that change in the header for next week for the second reading.
Okay, great. Any questions or comments regarding this one? Okay, seeing none, again, that will be on for the second reading in the April regular meeting. All right, moving on to item 9H, hearing from board members. Typically at the end of our meeting, if there is anything that a board member would like to speak about, this is the opportunity. Do we have anybody this evening that has anything to say? Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. We do have spring break coming up, and I wanted to wish all the members of our community a happy and a very safe spring break. We want you all to come back, maybe tanned, but at least happy and healthy.
Thank you. Any others? Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you. On that note, wishing good luck to all of our high school students. I'm not sure, I think all secondary level students, I should say, that are preparing for their common summative assessments that are happening this week to close out their week so they can fully enjoy their spring break. So wishing them all good luck.
Excellent. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford. I do have a couple of things.
Of course.
As we saw on the superintendent's update, many of us were at the hockey game with Stevenson, battled greatly. Unfortunately, they came up with a loss in overtime. I had been at the quarterfinal and the semifinal games, and I just want to commend the Stevenson hockey players when they lost, the poise that they had in losing. I think that's a reflection, excuse me, on their coach. And the one thing I did notice, when they lined up to receive their medals, their captain went down the line and hugged every team member, which I thought showed leadership, compassion for his teammates. This kid's going to do great. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I have been in a number of the schools to read. It's been just a joy. I hopefully will do some more this week. I want to thank all the schools and the teachers who allowed me to come into their school and read to their students. The students are just wonderful. They're inquisitive. They listen. They have a million questions about everything in the world. I had one young boy on Friday in first grade. No, they were kindergarten, I think. He knew everything about the Titanic. It was unbelievable, the facts that he knew, and he could spit them out. We just had a conversation about the Titanic. So it was absolutely wonderful. Thank you again for letting us in. I know a lot of my colleagues have been doing the same thing. I know Cabinet's been doing it. What a great thing for our young students to make sure they learn, they like to learn, and they have us into their classes. It was wonderful. Mrs. Oquist also talked about the Phantom of the Opera, and I know Mrs. Jarvis was there that night. And my wife, she was a singer and a dancer, and that's one of the first plays that I was able to take her to. and she said she thought she was at a Broadway play. That's how good it was. And it's not really, it's not easy to impress my wife with something like that. So I just want to commend them, everybody behind the scenes. The scenery was unbelievable. The performers, the voices that we heard were just outstanding. The first gal that came out and sang, I thought she was going to be the main person because she had such a wonderful voice, and it turns out she wasn't even the lead. But to listen to all of our talented students in that program was just amazing, and I just want to commend them for the program that they put on. So thank you, President Bradford, for allowing me to spew for a few minutes.
No problem. Thank you so much. Is there anybody else who would care to speak this evening? Well, I just want to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day today, and I hope that you did something fun and you're out having a good time. We certainly had a good time here this evening, and especially listening. One of my special favorite things is listening to Mrs. Oquist give her update, and I'm truly amazed by the talent, the academic achievements, the musical talent, the art talent, gosh, you name it. We're so very blessed in our district to have high quality teachers and awesome students and families. So I just want to say keep up the great work. I know it's usually a long update, but there's so many great things happening, and let's continue that. We have a lot to celebrate every single day in this district. So let's focus on all that good. So I hope everybody has a great night tonight, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Good night.